Hello and welcome to the Birth Untethered podcast. I'm Shellie, a long-time doula, advocate and former university lecturer.
And I'm Kemi, a badass birth keeper, formerly a UK registered midwife.
Just a couple of rebels with decades of combined experience in pregnancy, birth and beyond getting together to share wisdom. We exist to equip birth workers, families and seekers of truth with informed choice, not fear. Come as you are, learn what they don't teach. This is the birth revolution and you're all invited. Hi everybody and welcome to this episode with me and Kemi. Hey. Hi my lovely Kemi. So this is a big one. It's this episode has been a long time coming, and I think it probably will end up as 2 episodes if I'm completely honest, which actually I quite like the idea of, because it will then be 13 episodes that will be our first season, which kind of is nicely poetic with the cycles of the moons,
yes,
and womanly cycles and red threads. And as you can see, we've done our best. Those of you watching us on Patreon and YouTube, we've gone red today. I've gone red with the lippy. Kemi's gone red with the scarf, and my body's gone red with the time of the month.
Yes.
we were just
as we're oversharing.
Yeah, we were just laughing before we came on about the red thread and how I'm perimenopausal at the moment, so in the full-on tangle of the red thread craziness.
I've literally observed her going into it. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Really yeah, my brain not working, finding words. So
and we're all shocked because her brain was working for the both of us. So it's quite a mess now.
Yeah, I think you said to me, "I'm glad you're like a normal human now."
Yeah, that's right. I actually feel seen now.
So we're going to do our best to do justice to this really important cycle that is repeating through history, and give some kind of explanation and understanding as to why institutional birth is the way that institutional birth is now, and how that cycle of oppression of women has repeated itself through history, and a bit of why that's happened through changes in societal structures, through changes in religion, through changes in what is important, valued in society in terms of kind of the growing of industry and money and power, etc., etc. We're hopefully going to try and make a circle of a red thread, and apologies in advance for any knots of confusion along the way, but we'll try our best. So I have actually got some things that I've written down today just to try and get a little bit of order, because honestly we've been working on this podcast for months and it's a little bit late coming out because we just kind of keep finding more things that we want to share with you, or I definitely have anyway. I've had something else I want to include. It's a mammoth one, and so get yourselves a nice cup of tea or something delicious and join us for the ride. Childbirth is a rite of passage. And when we look back through our history, we can start to see patterns and cycles emerging around childbirth, society, memories, and how the deep-seated modern day fears that people have around childbirth have been created and then passed down through the generations. Because ancient societies revered birth as a rite of passage, but in our modern culture, birth has been minimized for the vast majority of people into a medical event, a clinical procedure, a problem to be managed, basically. And women are en masse now stepping into motherhood, not empowered and transformed, but broken, doubting themselves, told to silence their instincts and trust, listen to somebody else's authority. Is it accidental? You know, broken women are easier to control. Broken families are easier to manipulate. Unhealthy families make more money for big corporations. And this pattern didn't happen overnight. It's part of a really, really long pattern where women rise in their power and then are subjugated, diminished, dismissed, scapegoated, erased. And it repeats through centuries, through cultures, through religions, through the rise and fall of entire civilizations and belief systems. And in these cycles, there are these patterns. There are patterns of acceptance, of silence and silencing. There's collusion and there's resistance. Woohoo! Vive la resistance. And we see it play out in every generation. And the modern day behaviours of medical staff, of those of us resisting the patriarchal dominance, it's all happened before, over and over, and it will happen again long after we are gone. And in researching this episode, Kemi and I actually have both taken deep comfort in this, as sometimes it just feels too much to bear, you know, where we're trying to fight this massive tide of harm happening to people that we're witnessing, and we're trying desperately to explain to people how things can be better, and it's like people don't want to listen, they can't hear it, and you just often we feel like we're struggling against a massive tide. So it has been very comforting, I think, for both of us to realise that women have been doing exactly this for longer than history has existed. And actually that knowledge of knowing that her story, so rather than his story, her story, our story, is older and wiser, and that it will always prevail. And I myself have found that incredibly comforting.
Me too, because in what I've been seeing is the actually returning to the blueprint. The blueprint's very short and simple, and you'll see it as we speak, and you know we'll probably reflect it to you in various ways. But that's the comforting part also. Yes, this what's happening has happened before. It's quite cyclical, but back to basics will always be grounding for us, and also welcoming in some of what we've learned through this cycle. So yeah, very comforting.
Yeah, and we are the nurturers and the birthers of all life. Okay? And I really want you to remember that. No men would exist without women. So wake up, women. Realise how just fucking awesome you are, basically.
And you waking up, you actually remembering that will enable us to transition into healthier times when it comes to childbirth. It's us forgetting that allows us to be more controlled. It's us forgetting who we are that enables us to blindly assist the patriarchy to dominate over women. So I think us remembering and us supporting each other and coming together will go a long way to ending this painful part of the cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to understand these things that we see playing out in modern day that can feel really heavy and depressing, like, for example, the 748 unimplemented recommendations in the latest inquiry by yet another government, and another inquiry that likely is going to go nowhere, the failure of maternity systems, the blame, the fear, the silence. We have to understand this story that came before, and how deep this red thread runs. And it really begins, and understanding that it begins long before hospitals existed, long before doctors existed, long before patriarchal structures existed. So we're going to follow that red thread through time and discuss the weaving of our modern culture around birth. And I think before I hand over to Kemi, who's going to start kind of at the beginning, I thought I would just explain a little bit about what a rite of passage is for those people who may not know. At its core, a rite of passage is a structured way a culture marks irreversible change. Not just something happened, but you are no longer who you were. And it's how humans make transformation legible, survivable, and meaningful. Okay, and there are generally 3 phases to a rite of passage. So it starts with separation. So you are leaving something behind, you are separating from something. And obviously in birth, we are leaving being a maiden and we are transitioning to becoming a mother or parent. And this kind of transition often includes physical separation. In many rite of passages, it may involve, in kind of ritual rites of passage, it may involve nakedness or a change in clothing. And obviously we see that in birth as well. There's often periods of silence, periods of fasting, periods of altered time, often all of which we see go through birth, and being set apart. There's an unraveling happening. And when that unraveling happens, we then step into the second phase, which is the liminality. So that's being on the threshold. So you are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you will be. So as you're going through labour, you are no longer just a maiden, but you're not yet a mother. And in that liminal space, there is this massive power for change, but there is also this massive unraveling. And often it's helpful to have a guide, someone to help you through if you feel fearful or in danger, that someone is there to help you to feel safe. And it's often a symbolic death and a rebirth. So you are no longer just responsible for yourself. You have a baby after this that you're responsible for. And it's why rites feel really intense, emotional, and sometimes frightening. Because the psyche is literally reorganizing itself. If we then don't get the third, which is the reintegration or the incorporation of things together, so you're returning with a new name. You're a parent now, you're a mother, your new status, your new responsibilities, and that there's recognition of that. We see who you are now. Okay, without that step, people get stuck between the worlds. They get stuck in that liminality. And this is what we see happening in medicalization. We're stripping away that rite so that it becomes a process, it becomes an event instead of an initiation. Yeah. It leaves people feeling, I don't know who I am now. I don't know how to be this. I don't know what to do. Because in a procedure, it asks, is this efficient? Is this birth happening according to our clock? Is it safe? Women's bodies are dangerous. Is it controlled? We need to control all of these factors. But in a rite, it asks, who is being transformed? Who is witnessing you? What meaning is made from this transformation? And if we don't acknowledge that loss, if we don't hold people safely in uncertainty, if we don't mark the change and witness that change, people are just left there without that integration. And, I really have become very convinced with all my conversations with Kemi and just what I see over the years that it's intentional. Because if you're left in liminality, it dissolves your ego boundaries, but then your ego is not built up again. It opens up your nervous system, and you can be left in a very vulnerable nervous state. And if you aren't given that space to safely imprint deeply with your baby, if that moment is disturbed, you feel disconnected from them or from your partner or from a family as a whole, as if that integration is disturbed. And we've spoken about that in episodes where those moments after birth where you're meant to be integrating as a family, if it's all, rubbing your baby down, like, when are you going to cut the cord? Okay, we just need to move you, actually. You can't stay here. We need to move you onto the postnatal ward. It stops that proper integration. And it means that people remain in this kind of dislocated space. You've remained stripped of your identity. You've lost your kind of temporal control because it's not being brought back and grounded in the moment. You remain in this heightened kind of feeling of needing heightened surveillance. This kind of worry leaves you nervous about how your baby is everything okay, because you haven't been reintegrated into that trust, into that knowing, into that being. And it leaves people easier to control. You become more compliant. If you're really unsure and someone says very definitely to you, no, you do need to feed your baby with this formula now, you're like, oh, do I? Okay. Yeah. It leaves you in self-doubt. It leaves you fragmented and disjointed. And a lot of people feel this. They can't really integrate into being a parent because everything has been so jarred. And it leaves us in a reliance on external authority. And that serves the patriarchy. If we trust what other people are telling us is right and good for us over what we feel in ourselves, it leaves us disjointed the whole time, all the way through. We're always questioning our decisions and feeling unsure of ourselves. And that's a really difficult place to be. And so people end up saying, I don't know what happened to me. Oh, thank goodness they were there to save us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than realizing that you didn't need saving.
You didn't.
They disrupted you and they've left you bereft of the feeling that you can save yourself, that you are amazing, that you can do this yourself, that you've got this amazing power. Yeah. And this liminal space, you know, it's this treading this fine line between trauma versus initiation. Yeah, so you can have a rite of passage and it can be traumatic if it's not then integrated. So you have a loss of control, you have this intensity, you have this vulnerability. And if you then don't have the integration, you are left sitting there. Whereas if you have somebody holding you, helping you to reintegrate, holding the space, even they don't even necessarily need to do anything, but allow you to go through the process and know that you're safe in order to get that integration yourself, it means that you're left with no meaning, no witness, no return. And this is how people feel. They didn't see me. They didn't hear me.
Yeah.
You know? So what we want is to bring this back. You know, we've got to have that formal debriefing, that formal witnessing, that formal holding and marking of identity change, of not just, well, you and your baby are fine, so that's that. You need space to say, gosh, I tell you, that bit was really tough. And you're like, yeah, it really was tough. I saw that was hard for you. But you know what? You did it. You went through that toughness. Let's explore that a bit more if you want to sit and talk about that, because it looked really hard. You know, I could see physically it was tough, but I think emotionally, where were you sitting there? What were you feeling in your mind? Giving space for people to explore and say about it so that they can integrate it into their psyche to understand it was really tough. And yeah, I felt really lost. I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. I even thought maybe I was going to die there. That was so intense, I felt I might die. But then I got through it. Then I did it, you know, and to feel that is amazingly powerful and so, so important, so that we're not leaving people, women, feeling unfinished, feeling like I was in a terrible state and then I needed rescuing. And you saved me. And men in white coats can save me. Yeah. So offer me up to the authority outside of my body because I don't have the power myself. Yeah. When you actually do.
Yes, I do.
So yes, and that's what modern things are like. But actually in the past, before patriarchal structures started coming in, we actually had more reverence of the power of women, of the amazingness of women. And Kemi's going to start by talking about mitochondrial Eve and what that is now.
Yes.
She's got her notes ready.
Mitochondrial, of course. Mitochondrial, postmenopausal, like, we'll talk about that another time. But I do need to, first of all, say that, as most people will know, mitochondrial Eve was born. So birth predates mitochondrial Eve, and mitochondrial Eve was amongst a whole bunch of women who were also giving birth and were also born. So humanity predates her, and we don't know how long. Some people estimate it's 1 million years that the current form of humanity has been available. Sorry if you can hear my notifications going, but focus, right? So mitochondrial Eve, let's go back to her, because apparently when analysed, the mitochondria that we currently carry, all of us, goes back to Eve, theoretical Eve.
Yeah, so it's not the biblical figure Eve.
No,
it's an actual woman. Is it about 150 to 200,000 years ago, they think?
Very good. So, yeah, it's between 200 and 300,000 years ago. But it's just that there were other women giving birth, but it's quite easy for a mitochondrial line to die out. So it will die out whenever the last woman is born in that lineage. So there could be a continuation of boys being born in that lineage, but the mitochondrial descendants would have stopped, because mitochondria goes down the female line and Y DNA Adam goes down the male line. So if males having boys with their partners. So just to say that we exist a lot longer than mitochondrial Eve. The origin, Africa. the origin of humanity is Africa. And loads of people have obviously wanted to really push against that truth, but it keeps getting affirmed again and again in research and science, etc. So all humans today trace maternal DNA back to Africa. As I've mentioned before, that even though the other bloodlines died out, we can learn as much as we need to learn from the way we do things, our rituals, our physical needs, our heritage. It is shared, because all of us that are on the planet today are descended from her. So even though there are other women that existed, predated her, our particular needs as humanity, our psychological needs, our physical needs, everything is descended from Eve. What we know about the way we are born and what our needs are is just taken from information passed down from woman to woman and the societies and the communities that held them. So what we learned was that birth was social. So women didn't expect to give birth alone. They always knew that they would be held by somebody. It begins, the fact that we all survived way before medicine shows that that holding was effective, that society acknowledged what was happening for the woman and supported that. So however it looked, it could be a partner outside of the cave, it could be a partner outside of the hut. It tended to be with other women who were holding the space. They weren't doing anything medical. They were doing what served that rite of passage that Shelley was talking about earlier.
No, but Kemi, I've had people in my comments going, yeah, but childbirth is dangerous before medicine. 50-50 chance of survival.
I know their wild guesses. I'll come to that. I'll come to the whole safety aspects.
Let's just be very clear. It's never been 50-50. It's never been 50-50. Okay.
No, it's not.
And the definitions around childbirth of what is high risk are always, in my opinion, mental. I mean, I really want to swear there, fucking mental. If you have less than 1 in 1,000 risk, they say you're high risk.
Yeah.
And it's the same with birth. You know, the same with the maternal death rate, the same with baby death rate, you know, this kind of perception that half of women died in childbirth. The human race would not exist if half of women died in childbirth, because women would be like, I'm not doing that.
Of course. And those of us serving them, if we went to births and every other birth ended in catastrophe, we wouldn't do the job. We wouldn't. Yeah. There's easier ways to function in society without seeing death every other birth. But as we know, when people, I mean, 50-50 is ridiculous, but when people want to be hyperbolic about death when it comes to childbirth and looking back through the ages, they will be looking at infant mortality up to a year, you know, or they'll be remembering the worst times. Yeah.
Because it is worse up to 5 years in the past, obviously, because of, you know, not understanding infection, because of nutrition.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. We'll be talking about that in a minute as well, because, you know, the needs met in childbirth, as in who's holding her societally, what she can expect from her community, the fact that she'll have other women serving her who would likely have already been through the process, know the process well, served at the process. All of that knowing, all of that community knowing really helps a woman, as, like you said, reintegrate herself on the other side of that rite of passage. If she's got people looking at her, looking into her eyes, touching her skin, who have said, I know, you felt like you were going to die, I know, and they can be unblinking and offer her that assurance that she's arrived on the other side with her baby, and then she can exhale and get to know this new being. So they don't, you know, humans giving birth from the beginning of time, whenever that is. We know it's way beyond 300,000 years. We could expect that kind of support. The way the woman will move in her birthing, she'll be upright, she'll be mobile, she'll be adopting these birth positions that assist gravity in assisting her to give birth. She'll be using her legs, she won't be immobilized, so she can work with her baby to facilitate birth. That's what you could expect. That's not a medical provision. That is societal. That
It's just
is what
supporting
comes down in the
instinctive
DNA.
behaviour,
It's
isn't it?
it's
Supporting that
instinctive.
instinct. Yeah, you
Exactly,
instinctively
exactly.
move, and if you feel safe to move, how feels good for you, and the people around you are there for you to grab on if you
Yeah,
need them to hold you,
yeah,
and they
yeah,
do that willingly and with love.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
you know,
And
that's kind of
they
good.
are confident in your ability to bring about the birth of this baby. So they're in celebration mode even before you've done it, because they've seen it over and over again. Their expectation is for a wonderful outcome, because as you will learn throughout this episode, when people are looking at mortality rates, actually mortality in childbirth is the little piece. It's what happens afterwards. And that's, we'll talk a bit more about that. There are different determinants of that. It's not about the safety or efficacy of childbirth. So, upright mobile positions, sound and vocalization were encouraged. It's only recently that we would want to give a woman an epidural to shut her up because she's frightening the other women on the ward. That's a recent thing. Vocalization was expected. You would be hummed with, you would be cried with as you do that transition, because the expectation is a good one. It's going to be a great outcome. Yeah. Pain was expected, it wasn't feared. So I'm talking about these things that we know now. They sound familiar, don't they? Because those are the kind of births that Shellie and I attend, facilitate. Those of you that listen to us week after week, you also have this expectation of childbirth. It's not a bad thing. It's not a risk to be controlled. We expect sound. We expect vocalization. Even outside of medicine, society, a good birth. Oh, she's a good, quiet birther. Oh, she just breathed that baby out, being perpetuated. Women should be silenced. Neither Shelley or I could ever be described as silent women, but we are very, we are very healthy women. Sound is health, vocalization is health, and the pain being expected, not feared. You see, that's the thing, pain-free birth. The idea our society is trying to perpetuate, this idea of pain-free birth. It's a rite of passage. It is called labour for a reason. I've been challenged. Oh, when you call it labour, that's negative connotations. I said, mate, you're going to work to get this baby out, right? We don't
It's
need to
really interesting,
deny
isn't it?
that.
The pain thing, because as humans, because we've got this cognitive brain, we like to
Mm,
really rationalize and analyze and think about things.
mm,
Animals feel pain, but we don't see them like falling into depression or
no.
into anxiety about that pain. They just
Mm,
accept it. They understand that it's a sign of something. They're
yeah.
like, that's a
And they
sensation. It's
respond
giving
to
me,
it.
yeah, it's giving me information. If
Mm-hmm,
I put weight on that leg, it hurts.
mm-hmm,
So I'll just do it in a different way, and I'll
mm-hmm,
instinctively move in a way that is more comfortable to give it time to heal.
mm,
There's not this, I'm in pain, so therefore something's bad, or I'm weak, or I need, this kind of strive for having perfection, I
mm,
suppose, as humans,
mm,
this strive for this idea that having no pain is perfection, when actually it's
mm,
just a very unrealistic thing, because it gives us information, and we see in birth that if people don't have that information coming back to them, that babies end up more in awkward positions, that things end up going more wrong, because we've not got that feedback of, for example, if a baby's sort of facing sideways, you're going to get pain in one side. That information is helpful. That means, okay, the baby's head's a bit wonky, it's pushing that side. We need to change the position. And you,
Yes.
without even cognitively thinking about it, if you're getting all pain on one side, you will shift your body in a way that makes the space more available for the baby's head to move into a better position. If you get rid of that
Yes.
pain, you have none of that information. And so the contractions are desperately trying to change a baby, but you're in a still position that's not helping them. And they just end up more and more wonky. And therefore, it doesn't work. Therefore, you need forceps. Therefore, you need a cesarean to be able to birth that baby, when actually that information could have meant that you could just move. Sometimes it's millimeters that that baby needs to get, a
Yeah,
little bit of space to move into the right position. And we're denying people that knowledge. We're denying people that
we are.
connection.
We are. We are. And you see, the dichotomy there is so wonderful that you just expressed that, because the epidural actually is a wonderful thing. So, say if you're going to be giving birth in theatre awake, that epidural will mean that you'll get to meet your child earlier than if you'd received a general anaesthetic. So I hope that's a precursor to a conversation we're going to have a bit later, which is that we are not throwing the baby out of the bathwater. We're not saying, oh, all medicine is bad. I think we need to welcome aspects of medicine as a blessing. The
Yeah.
epidural is one. It's just that if you're misusing the epidural to silence a woman, to keep her quiet, etc., or you're doing it to be more comfortable, forgive me for saying, the pursuit of comfort at the expense of being able to move when the baby needs you to move has outcomes. Yeah, it worsens outcomes, just like what Shellie just explained. So this is another reason why our thoughts about pain, we need to review them, address them. Let's not just see it as something that needs to be eliminated. Let's see it as a messenger. The pain speaks to us and helps us to move. And even if we can't convert what the feelings are that the pain gives us into words or a concept, it will make us move, just like what Shelley explained of the mammals. And that is you working with your baby. Hands-on care, touch, massage, guidance. Because, back in those days, 300,000 years ago or more, we didn't have things to to enable comfort like the epidural. So touch was used. Other things were used. Herbs were used. Massage was used. Singing, humming was
Drumming.
used. Crying, drumming, yeah, was used. All of those things were used. And I can tell you right now, as somebody who's enabling and maintaining my own health, those are the things that I use today. So this is why I want us to be encouraged, because we haven't forgotten these things. They've come down through all those generations, and we're holding it as a truth in our hearts, regardless of how crazy the birth world looks right now. We
Yeah.
absolutely can easily return to basics. It's wonderful. It's hidden in us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And they've worked. They've
yeah,
worked all that time,
yeah,
and they're still there. And
yeah.
that rediscovering is part of that cycle. That kind of
Yes,
popularization of things is all part of this red thread and cycle. This is what we're saying, that
yes.
it's actually very comforting that when you look back, it helps you to look forward and recognize that, yes, sometimes the dominance and the control and things rise, but then it will keep cycling round. It will fall
It
again, and
will.
it's very
It
comforting.
absolutely will. This time in the in the history of childbirth is just a blip. It really is. And we will return to what has been embodied, that knowledge that has been passed down way before things were written, way before things were recorded. It's embodied wisdom, embodied knowledge passed down from birthing mother to birthing mother with the community that surrounds her. And I just feel really good about that. I do. I think it's amazing. Also, that embodied knowledge, that inner knowledge, the innateness of what we know about childbirth passes on to post-birth. It's not just about the birthing of the baby. We've passed down an embodied knowledge about birthing of the placenta. Most of us would choose to bury it or use it, not discard it. Sometimes, like was described by amazing Robin Lim, who comes up very often in our episodes, but she, traced back what happens with placentas and found that sometimes they would warm the placenta. So the placenta would be born, and they'd warm the placenta if the baby's having a bit of trouble transitioning. What that would do would slow down the coagulation of the blood within the baby's blood within the placenta, so that it can pass to the baby more easily. They recognise that the postpartum is critical. Reason why? Because the baby was nourished by the breast, and the breast of the mother would produce the milk most likely to help the baby to flourish. Obviously, there would be other women in the community that could also breastfeed that baby, but the baby and their mother uniquely matched, and the baby will flourish the most with their own mother's breast milk. So it was in the community's interest to keep the woman alive. So that was the postpartum. That was massaging her just to help move her blood through her body after a huge event like that. It's to provide comfort so she didn't stay in the trauma response, that she could more easily integrate. It was to nourish her, nourishing foods, making sure she rested so that she could recover her strength from the birth journey. Warm foods, she'd be protected so that she could drop into her oxytocin and endorphins and do what needed to be done for herself and her baby with regard to healing and nourishment. And this care lasted for weeks, months, because it was in their interest to keep the woman alive so that she could be there for her baby. But also, as humans, wouldn't we ordinarily seek the well-being of people that are in their vulnerability, people that are sick? Yeah, that's what the community does. We don't need medicine necessarily to do it. Medicine has brought things to us that in many aspects could be considered beneficial when used in the right way, not when misused as we do at the moment.
Yeah, when they're needed. Because it's not, for example, in the interest of a formula company for women to be supported by their community, for them to have good nutrition, for them to be cared for, because then they can't sell their formula.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. So we can see already by joining those dots through a system that is negating the innate power of the woman and her ability to birth and then bring her infant to her breast. Yeah, rather than that, I want us to really aim on reminding each other about what we're capable of with basic care, and just use medicine when it's necessary. I don't want us to negate the power of medicine. It is there, but we can't expect our society to get back to flourishing if we just default to medicine or outsource our well-being to medicine. So just a bit about the context. We started talking already about the context when people say, oh, well, if not for medicine, everyone would die. What used to cause death, before modern medicine, and it wasn't just medicine, it's the way our society is set up these days. What used to cause death, and not in childbirth, it may, if you've got a malnourished woman who then becomes pregnant, often things happen in the pregnancy, even before labour and birth. But that's why I'm saying I want us to realise that death in childbirth is not a common event. It remains a rare event. And the reasons why: most deaths used to be caused by malnutrition, infection, which Shelley's already mentioned, unsafe water supplies, poor sanitation, poverty, and overcrowding.
All reasons that are still happening today.
There you go. You took the words right out of my mouth. You like my
Sorry.
missus. You
I didn't
like
mean
my
to steal your
missus.
thunder. I didn't mean to steal your
You
thunder
didn't
there.
steal my thunder. Our thunder is intact. But that's exactly what I'm saying is if society is being weakened today, there'll be, because a lot of the reasons why this is happening around the world today is political. And you can weaken a society by ensuring that all these things are happening in the society. And yes, it does have an effect on mortality, but it's not about childbirth mortality. It's about mortality generally with women and children who take up the majority of society, right? So I just want us to be aware of that when we're being manipulated into thinking that we need to accept medicine blindly because it improves outcomes. No, what actually was impairing the outcomes was the list I just gave you.
Yeah, when I
Healthy,
looked, I've
yeah,
got it down a bit later, but it feels like it's
yeah,
appropriate to bring in here that
please do.
when I've looked back at historical information about death rates, maternal death rates in childbirth, it actually, even in estimates back to prehistoric times, it looks like it's around just over 1% of women died in childbirth.
1%.
Yeah.
1%. I
So
love
not
that you've looked up
50-50.
those figures. Is
Nowhere
it not
near
50-50?
nowhere near 50-50 people, just over 1%. And interestingly, it actually
Really good.
increased, okay, as society got more organized. We're sort of going to go through this timeline, but we're kind of jumping. This is what I'm saying. We're doing a tangle of red thread today because that's just the way that we're rolling. This
Yeah.
the tangle. It'll all come clear in the end. But that actually in sort of more medieval times, so where we're getting people coming together, but not necessarily in such healthy conditions. So people together in the times that Kemi's talking about are in hunter-gatherer society. So they're moving around, they're following the nutrition, they're following the water, the fresh water supplies. Okay,
Yes.
mortality actually increased when civilization became more civilized in inverted commas,
Yeah.
because it wasn't understood about the clean water supplies, and people were crowded together in unhealthy conditions, chucking their shit out the window and then people drinking that and all that kind of thing. So actually the mortality increased to higher than 1% at that time.
It really
And
did.
that's often where a lot of the fear comes from. Maternal mortality now is round about 0.02%. So it's very low, but it's, this whole thing of, well, birthing at home or birthing without a doctor there makes it like medieval mortality rates. No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Not in
It
any way,
doesn't.
shape, or form, because we don't have, there's not prevalence of rickets and other issues with nutrition that
Yeah.
there was. There isn't the issue that water is going to be dirty and
Yes.
cause problems,
Yes.
and there is modern medicine available if you need it. If
Yes.
something is arising that is not working, you can seek help. That's what it's there for. That's what it's designed for. And
That's
actually,
right.
it's what the medical model is good at. We spoke about this with
Very
Simon on
good.
the previous podcast, that actually medicine is good about dealing with emergencies. They're not so good with preventative care, which is more where Kemi and I would sit, like speaking to you about nutrition, speaking to you about how you can move your body to help balance things, so that you are preventing problems before they even occur. If that makes sense, it reduces the likelihood of those. So yeah, I thought I'd just share that there.
I love that you just shared that. I actually made a list what modern medicine does well, because I just want us to realise we can take the best of it. Yeah, we don't need to get rid of all of it. Transfer to hospital from the setting I painted earlier is really a good idea and a lovely option in some circumstances. Yes, like Shelley just mentioned, we do speak very preventatively a lot, because there's lots of things about the modern lifestyle that lend themselves towards worsening birth outcomes. So yes, we've got in many societies, and in the more privileged ones, we've got a plethora of food that we could eat, but we might still be choosing to eat the wrong stuff, or stuff that looks like food but isn't. So we're in this wonderful situation where it's all available, some of us, but we still are not really choosing what works when it comes to conceiving a baby, growing a baby, and getting that baby born, and then nourishing that baby. So, yeah, some of the things that modern medicine is good for, hemorrhaging, okay, for instance. But that doesn't take away the responsibility that we have as mothers to make sure that the choices we're making pre-conception during our pregnancy do not contribute to a higher chance of hemorrhaging. Yeah, so we can't outsource. We have to come inwards and do everything we can to reduce those chances. Obstructed labour.
Can I
Wonderful.
just circle back to hemorrhage there? Because
Yes, please
I
do.
actually, I appreciate that the drugs that we have now, that if hemorrhage is not manageable by physiological means,
Yeah.
is helpful and prevents death.
Yes.
But what I would interject there is that modern medicine and the way midwifery is being practiced, like obstetric nursing now, it causes more hemorrhage
100%.
than if a birth space was just held safely. So
Yeah.
I have supported hundreds of births, okay, and I haven't seen hemorrhage when that physiology is respected in any of those births. I know it's going to happen at some point because number wise it will happen, okay, but I have seen hemorrhage because of medicalization, because
Yeah.
of intervention.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like the medicine is good, but it's being overused. It's being interjected
Amazing.
in and disrupting that integration time with wanting to jab people because, you know,
Yeah.
they want the time. They're looking at their watch and saying, well, this placenta's not out within an hour, so I want to give you a medication to make it come, even when everything's fine. And actually, maybe that placenta just needs that little bit longer. They need that little bit longer of integration time. So yeah, again, it's always that. I think this is something that's really important because often people, obviously on social media, it's difficult to get across nuance, isn't it? And people, when they have a very set idea, they often jump at me and Kemi, believing that we hate all medicine, we hate all intervention, we hate all medical professionals, we hate all midwives, you know, this, because what we're portraying is the worst of what we see, to help people become aware of it so that they can avoid it, so that they can have tools to avoid it, so they can have tools to combat that, they can navigate it safely, however you want to say it. I'm sort of reticent to use fighting terms because actually I don't think it should be a fight. I hate that it is a fight. I want everybody to work together in a loving way, and I'd like that to be really clear. And in typical perimenopausal, I think I've completely lost the thread of what I was saying.
Oh, cut. I'm surprised you haven't had to stop more often. I'm actually impressed.
Oh,
I'm impressed.
it's gone. It's gone. What I'm saying is, like, medicine is great, but medicine needs to shut the fuck up until it's needed. I
100%.
suppose.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
It's really good.
If somebody's not actively bleeding and they're just cuddling their baby and they're not actively uncomfortable and their uterus is contracting down well, we don't need to mention an injection. We don't need to be even speaking about it. We can just keep an eye. Is the person well? Are they feeling okay? Are they happy with the baby? If they've said they don't want an injection, we don't need to be offering. If somebody's pouring blood down their leg, we're seeing a lot more. Yes, then we can say, okay,
let's do something.
I'm feeling a little bit concerned here. Let's do something. Do we want to see if the baby's going to feed? Are you warm enough? You know, you check. I'm not that you're having to ask the person if they're warm enough, but are they warm enough? Are you keeping the environment warm enough? Are we supporting their physiology in such a way that it may be able to resolve this? Can we trigger the uterus to contract if the person feels happy with that, in order to try and do it naturally without medication because they don't want it?
Because you can just use your hand.
That if those things are not working, the medicine is brilliant. But the medicine shouldn't be the first port of call if the person doesn't want that. I appreciate some people do, and that's fine. But most people, when they understand the consequences of that medication, when they understand that it is likely to have an effect on their breastfeeding, have an effect on how they feel about their baby, have an effect on that connection with their baby. And we're going to talk more about interventions in the next season so you can understand those implications more, so that you can make more deeply informed choices about what you want. You know, most people don't want that. They don't want those consequences unless they are needed. And when they're needed, they're brilliant. But they are being used far too much, causing far too much iatrogenic harm that is not serving families, women, babies, people. And honestly, I would argue the medical profession either, because it's creating distrust. I mean, people feel distrust in the medical profession, not because of the videos that Kemi and I share, but because of the content of what we see happening, because of the I'm going to give you the injection now, or just jabbing people without their permission. It's such a massive breach of trust in that rite of passage that it leaves people feeling distrustful. You know, if you break someone's trust, or your profession breaks people's trust a lot of the time, why should people trust you? They shouldn't. Your trust needs to be earned, you know.
100%.
And rightly so. Everybody's trust should be earned. You know, you've got to prove that you're trustworthy before people blindly accept that trust. And, you know, we should understand that, really. We teach our children to be safe around strangers, you know, and we've got, you know, and yet we're kind of like handing over our authority to other people, blindly trusting people, you know, when actually those people don't really necessarily know what they're doing. Just because someone has a medical degree or has a midwifery degree doesn't mean they understand how to support physiology. Unfortunately, I wish it did mean that, but it doesn't.
It really doesn't mean that. And as you know, to compare, the average hemorrhage rate in a birth taking place at home is 2%. I mean, for Shellie and I, we've seen far less than 2% of the births that we've attended have a hemorrhage in them, but they say it's around 2%. I guess that will be including NHS home birth teams, whilst it's around 43% on the unit. It's on the obstetric unit, which is supposed to be the safest place. So
it's just crazy.
I do.
A crazy amount.
It's a crazy amount that we're just happy with. So
I mean, I feel I have to highlight that here, because people are like, "Oh, I'm safer in hospital." No, you're not. Your chance of hemorrhage is increased by about 60% when you choose to birth your baby in hospital. That's not safer. Just because they've got the drugs to stop you bleeding to death doesn't mean you should choose a 60% more chance of bleeding to death.
That's right, exactly. So absolutely, really happy with modern medicine being available for hemorrhage. Absolutely agree with Shellie. Can you stop causing them, please? Thanks. The other one is obstructed labour. Obstructed labour, again, if birth can't proceed to a vaginal conclusion without instruments or forceps or ventouse, or if it cannot proceed at all to a vaginal end, so needs rescuing by caesarean. Really happy that modern medicine has practiced all the best ways to do that, you know, in inverted commas.
But again, that shouldn't be, what is it, 43% of the population?
Oh yeah. So the majority of the population are having instruments or surgery. So we know that
it's more. If you include instruments, it's more than 43%.
Yeah, it's usually
43 is just caesarean now.
They're saying around 60% of births will have instruments or caesarean, or sometimes instruments and caesarean, and you know, so it's 40% or less that will give birth without either of those things. So we know it's medicine that has caused this. So again, it's the overuse, it's the misuse of medicine, but actually it being available is wonderful. Like the availability of forceps, even though the history of that obviously was refined on slave women without any kind of anesthesia. But the forceps, and when they learnt to actually sterilise them, and when they learnt to not move them from cadavers, to which I'm sure you're going to cover later, Shellie, moving from cadavers to living women, and when they learnt to wash their hands, it's a blessing.
And not lock up the person that suggested it might be an idea in a mental asylum.
Yeah, when we move past all of that, we can take the best of the availability of forceps. So again, it's about the overuse, the misuse that becomes the problem. But actually, the idea in itself, give thanks. Yeah, the idea that lives can be saved by major abdominal surgery with the woman awake. Can you imagine that? Caesarean with the epidural. Amazing. Double blessing. It's the overuse that is the problem. Placental complications. So if there's placental complications, there's things that can be done in medicine to still ensure that the baby survives, and if it involves placenta abruption, uterine rupture, that the woman survives too. Prematurity, being able to keep babies alive, from 23 weeks, 24 weeks, etc.
Okay,
Amazing.
I've got to stop you again though, because with
Go
the
on.
placenta, because now if we're giving cesareans to 43% of the pregnant population,
Oh,
we are
yes.
creating a massive increase in placental issues, placental
Yes.
implantation issues in
Yes.
subsequent pregnancies. So
Yeah.
again, this like miracle of medicine that can do these amazing things that Kemi's alluding to is causing huge amounts of problem and increased maternal
Yeah.
mortality. And when the old patriarchal rhetoric, women are getting older and fatter and more complex, okay,
Mm.
they're getting older by average like a couple of years. So it actually makes no difference in terms of health and outcomes, really, you know. Uh, fatter. Well, if you're having a vaginal birth, a physiological vaginal birth, your vagina isn't fat.
No.
It actually really doesn't make much of a difference to your outcomes. You know, Dr.
No.
Sarah Wickham has written a fantastic book on it. And actually, in some ways, it's protective, which I think is wonderful that she's highlighted in her book. So let's rule that one out. And
Shall we?
more complex. Well, they're getting more complex because of the way that the medical industry is treating them, because of the way that the medical industry is cutting in to nearly half of pregnant people, even though we know that only 5 to 10% of those actually need that.
Yeah. So
So
it's
they are causing the problems, and they just don't. They're
honestly,
just like la 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 la. I'm
it's
covering
the
my eyes. I'm covering my
overuse.
ears. Women,
Yeah.
women, women. It's your fault, and
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about. This red thread of blaming
Yes.
of women, saying
Yeah.
it's women's fault, saying women's bodies are dangerous. It's coming through history and repeating itself now in what we're seeing. So we can celebrate that medicine is wonderful to save lives, but we also need to highlight that it is making a lot of problems and
It's
making it more
creating a
scary.
lot of problems and making it more scary. And the future health of our descendants is in the balance right now. If we continue to allow the overuse of medicine, we're going to feel it. I've got loads of notes, but I just wanted to say also that public health needs to be celebrated, because that's actually what reduced mortality rates. So clean water, just the opposite of the situation that we're taking lives. Clean water, adequate sewage system, good nutrition, excellent hygiene, and just a simple thing like hand washing. It's public health initiatives that have saved lives and saved babies' lives. So we need to stop worshipping at the font of medicine and start to think more about getting back to basics. I've got a few more things to say, but we will just weave it into the conversation.
As predicted, Kemi and I have chatted well over an hour for these episodes, so I'm going to just interject here, and we're going to stop for this episode and continue on for the next one. But before we do, I thought I would just share some exact figures that I had researched for this episode and how that relates to deaths that are often used to scare people over time. In the prehistoric hunter-gatherer era, the infant mortality, which is the first year of life, figures are estimated to be 25 to 30%. The maternal mortality rate was harder to estimate, but likely around 1 to 1.7%. With the kind of classical antiquity time, so we're thinking at the height of the Roman and Greek empires here, the infant mortality was around 15 to 35. So it's in a similar range to the prehistoric hunter-gatherer era, even though we've got the rise of more medical thinking at that time. And the maternal mortality is just over around 1% per birth. Then in medieval Europe, the infant mortality, so in the first year of life, in this area it was 25 to 35%. So that baseline is going higher than we saw in the more prehistoric time there. The maternal is staying stable at just over 1%. Then we come into 18th century Europe, and the infant mortality is around 20 to 30, so exactly the same as we have from prehistoric hunter-gatherer era. And the maternal mortality here is around 1 to 3%, so it's actually increasing in that time. Then we come to the modern developed world, where the infant mortality is now less than 3%, and maternal mortality is 0.02. So as you can see from those figures, even before we had good historical records, there are kind of estimates about what the mortality rates would have been, and they have never been anywhere near 50. When we've got more formal records for maternal mortality in the UK, what we see is in maternal mortality, because it's actually quite low, it's done per 100,000 births. So in 1930, it was around 460 per 100,000 births. And then over the period of the next sort of 10, 20 years, we see a general decline with the invention of antibiotics. And then from 1950, it goes down to around 80 to 100 per 100,000. And that decline was the invention of chemotherapy, antibiotics, and treatment for hemorrhage that we speak about on these episodes. We then get this reduction through the 50s and into the 60s again to about 40 to 50 per 100,000 for maternal mortality. And this is probably in part due to increased surveillance of pregnant women. Women were very precious at that time after the war. We're trying to increase the number of people around. So there started to be more surveillance happening through pregnancy that could pick up potential problems. So preventative medicine, I'm not sure really you'd call it medicine, but preventative health surveillance is happening. It continues to kind of then decline. So in the 1980s, it was around 10 to 15. In the 2000s, around 8 to 12. Okay, and the causes have shifted to more indirect causes of maternal mortality, so more cardiac, more thromboembolism, more mental health issues, rather than really anything to do with childbirth just in of itself, if that makes sense. So yeah, in 2000 it was around between 8 to 12. In 2012 it was around 9 per 100,000, and in the current day we're seeing a rise. So in 2021 to 22 we saw a bit of a jump up to 13.56, and COVID did impact an increase there. Now, accounting for COVID related deaths, we actually see that the maternal mortality rate is 12.67, so it's higher than it was in the 1980s, in the 1990s, and that's due to iatrogenic causes. They like to say it's because women are getting older and fatter and more complex, but when we really dig down, that's not actually the case. In the ONS and Embrace data sources per 1,000 for neonatal mortality, so in 1970 it was around 25, okay, and again we've got this reduction down to around, in 2020, it's around about 2 per 1,000. So we have had reduction over time, but it's for a multitude of reasons. And it's not a drastic drop from a 50-50 death rate, especially of women, down to the very small numbers it is below. And it's for many reasons, most of which are more general health things rather than just the invention of obstetrics. You know, we can monitor women, and midwives do monitor women's blood pressure, etc., not under the umbrella of obstetrics, but just under the umbrella of general health, like we do. You know, you go to the doctor, they'll check your blood pressure and your general health, check your urine to make sure that you've not got diabetes coming up, all that kind of thing. So it's not obstetrics that makes things safer. And the data in studies supports that when you are birthing in continuity of care, midwifery-led care, it's safer than in obstetric patches. Okay, so when we really summarise those figures, we've gone from, in prehistoric times, a maternal death rate of just over 1% to now a 0.01%. So it's always been 99% safe to birth as a mother, okay? And for children and babies, that difference is more significant. but we're going from a 25 to 30% infant mortality rates to our current mortality rate, which is around about 3. Okay, so it has been more dangerous over time, but it hasn't been as significantly more dangerous as people would like you to believe. And that the perceived safety of a hospital environment, the perceived safety that obstetrics is supposed to bring, is not what we see in research. We see in research that you are as safe in terms of being alive. You and your baby are as safe in terms of being alive if you birth at home or you birth in a hospital. But what we see is there are significantly more levels of harm caused to you in a hospital than there are in a home birth setting. And that even if a complication arises at home, it is as safe for you to be birthing at home than if you're in a hospital, because you can transfer if needed. And usually there are very clear signs that more help may be needed before it becomes a really emergent problem. So I just wanted to really share those figures quite clearly at the end of this episode so that we can just cut the fear-mongering dead. We can just throw it out the window and come back to that instinctive knowing that Kemi and I have spoken about in this episode, that Kemi has so beautifully articulated. So on that note, we will see you next time for the concluding part of us pulling the red thread through until the present day. Bye, everybody. You can sign up to the Birth Untethered mailing list from the link in the show notes, become an Untethered Rebel, support the show, and join the growing community that meet together online each month to share collective wisdom, support one another, and also to receive extra resources that supplement podcast episodes. The information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and may not reflect those of the hosts. This content does not replace professional medical guidance.